Welcome to the Smart Citizen Conversations on Place Branding and Identity, the third in our series. Today, we turn our attention to the branding of two small nations. They are separated by more than 11,000 miles of the South Pacific Ocean, but still emerge as cross-hemispherical twins in their commitment and actions to put planet before profits. New Zealand and Costa Rica are universally recognized as pieces of natural paradise, valuing sustainability and the environment. Reverence for nature is reflected in the archetypal story of Whanganui River in New Zealand. The indigenous Maori believe that the river is a tupuna, an ancestor. And 4 years ago, the New Zealand government recognized in law what the Maori had been insisting all along. The river is a living being. Parliament passed legislation declaring that Te Awatupua, the river and all its physical and metaphysical elements, is an indivisible living whole and henceforth possesses all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. Costa Rica is synonymous with biodiversity and the pura vida. In the 1940s, more than three-quarters of the country was covered in mostly tropical rainforest and other indigenous woodland. But then there was uncontrolled logging, which led to severe deforestation. And by 83, only 26% of the country had forest cover. But through continued environmental focus by policymakers and incentives for reforestation, today the forest cover has increased to 52%, which is double the levels of 83. So how has this eco-literacy cascaded into the quintessential values that Kiwis and Ticos have come to epitomize? How have some of those natural advantages of the country been capitalized in branding them for the outside world? And what has this meant for the soft power of the two nations, especially when a pandemic is raging? So teasing out these issues is our skillful moderator, Simon Paterson, a seasoned brand strategist located in Barcelona. Simon has spent the past 34 years creating, redefining, and strengthening brands around the world. His work spans a range of sectors, including hospitality, cities, airlines, energy, financial services, retail, media, technology, university, business, design education, and culture. His portfolios included the recent rebranding of the Datai Langkawi, one of the world's most iconic hotels. He's also been involved in recent placemaking projects for the city of Shanghai and the Old Spitalfields Market in London. Simon has worked for many of the world's leading brand and design consultancies, including Wolf Olins, Addison, and Pentagram. So Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Vanita. Today we have Rebecca Smith and Daniel Valverde Bagnarello, both responsible for running the branding of their countries. We'll start with Daniel. Daniel is the Nation Brand Director of Costa Rica, a marketing strategist, growing awareness about trade, culture, tourism and foreign investment opportunities in Costa Rica through its country brand, Essential or Esencial Costa Rica. He's a PhD candidate skilled in the setup and management of diverse collaborative teams for either B2B or B2C oriented companies, and he's passionate about branding, sustainable growth models, and commercial challenges in the digital age. Welcome, Daniel.
Simon, and well, thank you for the invitation to be here, Vinita as well. Thanks for the introduction. So I'd like to start a brief presentation. Rebecca granted me the first place, so thank you, Rebecca, for that. And let's see if I can share my screen right now. And that's it. All right. Well, what kind of this presentation of a country will be if I don't show you a short clip about it from the very beginning. So here it is.
Perhaps the perfect place does not exist. It may be just an idea crossing our minds as something stirs our emotions, approaching us in a moment of peace, arising when we connect with our essence. Perhaps the perfect place does not exist. But if it did, what would it be like?
L'endroit parfait est fait d'harmonie. La conviction de faire partie d'un ensemble bien plus grand que nous.
المكان المثالي مصنوع من التنوع، نهوض نسق من الأفكار والأحلام الجميلة والمعقدة.
Der perfekte Ort besteht aus Inspiration, dem Antrieb, unsere Gegenwart zu verstehen, die in der Hoffnung auf eine bessere Zukunft verwurzelt ist.
完美的地方是努力的，始终做到最好，为了自己，也为了我们身边的人。
El lugar perfecto está hecho de talento. Esa certeza sobre nuestra capacidad colectiva, reflejada en el éxito de cada uno.
We all know that the perfect place does not exist. It must be built. It is created by walking together and encouraging each other. It is achieved by the endless commitment to the welfare of all. The perfect place is to be made.
Okay, so when most people close their eyes and think about Costa Rica, they picture something just like this. And although all these are real, every day more and more people around the world discover something that lies beyond this beautiful camouflage Mother Nature has given us. A true democracy used to challenge its own status quo to transform things for the greater good. All right. Beyond producing over 95% of its electrical power from renewable resources, Costa Rica has been passing innovative laws to protect their environment since 1970s, like the law of payments for environmental services. Such efforts have resulted in being home to over 6% of world's biodiversity in less than 0.03% of Earth's surface. As a matter of fact, Costa Rica has reported to be increasing its forest coverage, 1/2 of the country by now, and this has made it living proof that that betting on sustainability pays back. Probably you have heard that we abolished our army over 70 years ago, but that's just half the deed. The budget for the military was reallocated into health and education, a decision that nowadays explains how the country invests in both combined almost 17% of our GDP, quite a performance based in global standards. Like many other countries around the world, our exports started based in agricultural commodities like coffee and bananas. Thanks to key decisions regarding foreign trade policies since the second part of the last century, this has started to change dramatically. Today, our largest exports are medical devices, which account for over 20% of our exports. Also, our FDI strategies have evolved from bringing simple manufacturing companies to life sciences and advanced manufacturing companies. Today, 29 companies of the Fortune 100 have settled operations in Costa Rica. Although Costa Rica's GDP per capita, which is about 10,000 euros, is about 1/4 of New Zealand's, by the way, all those key decisions this long-standing democracy has taken over decades have built a momentum and a society that understands the importance of freedom, health, education, and care for the environment, which, by the way, are the concepts found in happy places around the world. In fact, one of the 5 known blue zones in the world is located in Costa Rica. We're probably one of the most efficient countries in the world, transforming economic growth into social progress. Now, either if you knew everything or nothing at all, I just told you about Costa Rica, it's clear that the country has built quite a reputation around achievements that are related to the SDGs. As other countries, Costa Rica's brand image and brand identity have gotten closer in many places in the world. While in other places, we still hear people saying things like, "Oh, I love Costa Rica. It's an island in the Caribbean, right?" And well, Puerto Rico is a very nice place, just not ours. Just we have some similar name over there. Getting back to place branding, our actual brand image in our key markets may not be the result of an elaborated, positioned strategy orchestrated over decades to harvest fantastic awareness and economic development opportunities. It'll be both naive and absurd, I think, to say that's how it works. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is the vision and purpose of a challenging project, which is our nation brand strategy. So it was almost 14 years ago when we found ourselves in the middle of an increasing awareness due to successful efforts to be recognized as an eco-friendly destination. But there were other remarkable assets beyond tourism potential we were not being recognized for. So a group of government officials started to foster the idea of creating a steering committee to build a branding strategy that could help close the gap between who we are and what the world knew about us, leveraging upon that successful positioning the country had achieved at the time. The objective was to build a conjoint narrative and deployment strategy that would aid in the development of socioeconomic opportunities, not only in tourism, but also in trade and investment. So 7 years after we launched this strategy, there's a lot to be said and discussed, for sure. But today I brought with me a few learnings I want to share. Some of them will sound familiar, others may not. You may agree with some of them, or maybe not. Whatever your thoughts may be, I wish that this presentation will leave you wondering if you should consider a field trip over the Atlantic or the Pacific, depending where you are, to my homeland. So it's not for a simple sector what we did. It requires a concerted strategy democratically orchestrated between all performers to move from a destination brand to a holistic one. In our case, a presidential decree was called to conform the national brand governance. This decree got together these 6 different institutions, other than public. This is the Foreign Trade Ministry, the Investment Promotion Agency, Tourism Bureau, Trade Promotion Agency, Foreign Relations Ministry, and the Culture and Youth Ministry. This decree got them together, and it required them to create this strategy, a concerted strategy, in which they all agree. Imagine that. So for that, a governance structure was required. So I like to explain this as a 3-story building. In the penthouse over there, there's the interinstitutional committee. They are in charge of the strategy and the alignment of it. They get together only 3 times a year. And the members of this committee is only the heads of all those 6 institutions I just told you about. Each one of these heads name technical official from their own institution to get together once every month. And they are in charge of the tactical coordination. And that's the 2nd story over there, which is called the technical unit. And there is on the 1st floor, in the lobby, we have the operational team, and they're in charge of the management of the brand, daily duties, services, all institutions, coordinates meetings, follow up on agreements, facilitates collaboration. So that's exactly my team where I am, and there's a lot of, I think it's a multidisciplinary team that have backgrounds in marketing, PR, I don't know, trade, tourism, etc. And well, it's not about what you see in the mirror. That's another thing that we got from the very beginning. So these are the 4 main stages before the launch of the brand. It started for us. It was key to start up with, instead of turn into an ad agency and start deploying all these beautiful logotypes and pictures and, I don't know, brand books and stuff like that, we started with research. So we hired the outsiders, another important thing, not local companies, because they already knew the country, or they already had a taste of the country, to go to international markets and to deploy both qualitative and quantitative studies. And we went a little bit loco over there because we went through, we studied 79 different places in the world for this. Remember, that was 2008. Nowadays, well, at that time, we didn't have the tools we have nowadays in the internet, in the digital world, to retrieve information. So we thought that would be the best thing to do at the time. And that was really successful because we start finding that how people perceive the country, not necessarily how we thought we were known for at the time. Then we moved to the development. We hired also outsider suppliers for this, for the brand conceptualization based on that research. And they brought different alternatives, which we started testing by 2012. With also international stakeholders to see what fits best for Costa Rica. It was very important that whatever we were about to deploy in terms of narrative was a clear reflection of what the country was all about. We were not making up a country. We were explaining what it was all about, what it was closing the gap from what the country was known for and what the country was also all about. And then we launched it in 2013. That's where we first got a national public interest distinction, which is a very important paper you need for such projects. And then the presidential decree I just told you about that brought on board just the formal structure on the governance of it. Then it's not about a lower place marketing, but we have needed marketing efforts for different reasons. The brand has embraced place marketing initiatives for local awareness at kickoff, but also to build and sustain momentum, to engage with audiences willing to get key messages through, both local and international, and to distribute available budget according to expertise in each sector, of course. Then it's not to feature a single industry nor branding packaging, like some sort of quality seal that reviews raw materials, if you take that as an example. For us, it's about commitment, consistency, and truthful storytelling. Our country brand licensing program, which is one of the things I love most about my job, was built reviewing over 18 different competitiveness standards and guidelines from 4 major international standard organizations. The result is a quite inclusive valuation process recognized in 2018 by the International Trade Center Sustainability Map Initiative, which promotes the creation and development of sustainable value chains around the world. Through this program, companies commit to embrace our values at their core. And as you can imagine, both social progress over there in the fuchsia color over there in your screen, and sustainability are big slices of the pie. The assessment has about 110 questions, I think, that require supporting evidence. And ever since it was launched, it has been growing and evolving, growing and evolving, growing and evolving, because, well, things change as well from one year to the other. The license is granted for 5 years with a midterm review. But I think the greatest deal is having companies that have committed to a greater purpose. And through this, they help tell the story of our place brand narrative beyond words alone. Also, it's not about a vision of things to come. It's said that a place brand is one for which you can't control the product, right? So it's logical to focus your narrative on earn or own assets, not things that you just pay and start making up things. That will be something else. Although our HERCs do their best trying to land discussions and debates of new public policies in the right path, it is not safe to embrace into divisive topics, at least not from our point of view. And that's a second best reason to not leverage into public policies that are being lively discussed in Congress. The first one is that doing so will link the strategy to politics, and that's, in my opinion, the beginning of the end. Also, it's not a short-term project a career in politics can benefit from, if you think about it. Since place brand strategies deliver in the long run, it's not likely that success can be attributed to a single governmental period. Nevertheless, the idea is always out there. That's one of the reasons why the role of the technical unit I just explained you about is so critical. Although hierarchies in the Nation Brand Committee may change from one presidential period to the next, the officials that conform this technical unit are not usually replaced due to political shifts. This is how the legacy and integrity of the Central Costa Rica place brand strategy has endured over the 3 presidential periods. Also, it's not about secret recipes, you know. What I'm telling you today is how we have done things, but they're not necessarily the only way to do things. Countries, just like cities, belong to greater territories that affect directly their brand. We believe we will achieve greater things for our country if we share and collaborate with our neighbors, rather than looking at them as just competitors. Locally, other 15 Ibero-American nations think about the same. So that's why since 2013, we have been gathering once a year in the great name of place branding to share our work, not only between us, but with whomever approaches, willing to understand and contribute to our line of work and the challenges we face as a region. And finally, one thought out there. If we all put sustainability at the heart of our place brands, we will be helping to transform social distancing into social happiness. So the next most contagious thing on earth would be a smile. So I hope you enjoyed this short presentation, and I look forward to see you in Costa Rica sometime in the near future. Pura vida.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel, for that fascinating presentation. I think it's really impressive that, and certainly one of the first times that I've really come across the idea of a country, its policy being driven by a holistic branding strategy. So it's a really impressive achievement. I've got a number of questions, but before we start the questions, I'm going to hand over and let's hear the story of New Zealand from Rebecca Smith, who is leading the New Zealand story. Rebecca, welcome. Rebecca is, as she says in her profile, an optimistic, energetic and experienced marketeer and brand builder, leading the New Zealand story, which is an initiative to improve perceptions of New Zealand on the world stage beyond natural beauty. Rebecca, thank you, and we look forward to hearing the New Zealand story and seeing what you have in common with Costa Rica, but also where there are some differences.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. We have so much in common with Costa Rica. It was when I went to visit Daniel, it was like 2 soulmates finally finding each other and being able to share so much in terms of what our countries stand for, our approach to nation branding, and also some of the frustrations and the learnings that we've both experienced as well. So I'm going to talk a little today about New Zealand, and I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on it because we've experienced some rather significant upheavals over the last couple of years, and I want to talk about how that's impacted on perceptions of New Zealand and some of the positives and some of the negatives around that, and then answer some questions regarding it. First of all, I am going to show a video because every country produces a video. We actually produce a lot of videos. That is the content world that we live in today. And so I'll share that with you and then I'll present from there. So one moment.
Great.
When I think of New Zealand, I think of a place that is pure and magical, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen my entire life.
New Zealand is spectacular. Subhanallah. It's really that piece of heaven that is on earth.
We care for people and our planet and our future generations.
And that comes from a word in Māori that we call kaitiakitanga.
We're on a mission to make better things in a better way and tread more lightly in the way that we make products.
to be thoughtful about the environment.
The only way we're going to make positive change in the world is to do things differently, and that's what we try and do.
And our gift to the world is not just our beautiful environment, but all of our talent.
New Zealand embraces and celebrates innovation, whether it be food, but also wines that stand up to the best in the world.
They created a style of Sauvignon Blanc that took the world by storm.
New Zealand is a country rich with creativity, and when you combine that creativity with the power of technology, that creates things that no one could have imagined possible.
New Zealand is right bang in the middle, and I love that very much.
And what we can offer is limitless. Technology is our fastest growing industry.
We've been able to develop boats here in New Zealand that are capable of 4 times wind speed, so we're very much pushing the edge of technology and construction.
And at Google we love Kiwis because Kiwis have this can-do attitude. You're looking for people who are just going to make things happen.
And my education in New Zealand convinced me that I could achieve anything I wanted to do.
You're taught to question, you're taught to wonder, you're taught to puzzle, to be inspired.
自由なエデュケーションを受けることができて、自由な考えを持つこともできたというふうに感じます。
At my school, we've got kids from all over the world.
160 different languages are spoken in New Zealand.
Opportunities are equal to all.
But we're also good at other things. Lots of other things. Look at the movies they make.
They do the best visual effects.
他们没有把它当成一个工业产品，而是把它当成了一个艺术品。太棒了。
Our gift to the world is our people, who succeed wherever they go.
To be a Kiwi now is something that I'm very proud of. I'm lucky that I grew up here.
And although we're only small, we believe we can take on the world.
It made me feel there is nothing impossible. It was the window to the world for me in New Zealand.
Be ready to fall in love with this country because it's not a hard task.
What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people.
So how did we get to that place? How did we get to a place that people describe in this way? Well, we started many, many years ago, and our goal was to develop an authentic place brand position for the sustainable well-being and prosperity, as well as long-term economic success. And well-being is a really key word for us here in New Zealand because it's not just about economic growth. It's about ensuring that whatever we do benefits both our own people and benefits others as well. So many years ago, we are often viewed this way. This is our most well-known brand, if you will, our 100% Pure New Zealand tourism campaign. And like many countries, we have really relied very heavily on our tourism program to portray a face to the rest of the world and convey messages to the rest of the world. And it's been extremely successful and regarded as probably one of the most successful tourism campaigns that's been running now for 20 years. And so that's great. And we bring in a lot of revenue and a lot of economic success, and it brings diversity into our country. And it puts a face, it gives New Zealand a face for many who otherwise wouldn't know who we are or where we are. Tremendous reach and tremendous support and capital sitting behind it. But you can hear that there's a slight but in my voice because whilst this is what is known about us, the unintended consequence, therefore, is that we're often seen as a very empty place with very few people and quite an adventurous place, but not much else going on. And that's the unintended consequence of portraying oneself as a beautiful country, which we are indeed. So that has the effect of having given us a very uneven profile in the minds of our consumers and buyers and influencers all around the world. We're seen as, as having a very good government, as being very peaceful, quite welcoming people, lots of natural beauty, but not necessarily that great in terms of science and technology. I don't really know what products you have. You've definitely got no historic buildings, which is actually quite true. We do have natural beauty instead of that. And actually, I don't know a great deal about your culture and your heritage and what else you do in this country. So that's been the starting point for New Zealand a number of years ago when we established this nation brand program. And so what we realised is that we needed to take people on a journey from what they know already to the things that they're not as familiar with, and then introduce the unknown elements of New Zealand to the world. But we couldn't leap straight to the unknown. That would cause a degree of cognitive dissonance for our audiences. We needed to take them on that gentle journey, getting them nodding, going, yes, that's the country I'm familiar with. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I really didn't know that. And that takes time. It takes time and commitment, and it's many, many, many bites at the cherry, not just one campaign that's going to solve for that. So it's a long-term strategy for us. Because there's a great deal that we do that is not necessarily that well known. And they range from our advancements in agriculture to our advancements on the water, as you would have seen with the America's Cup, through to the fact that we have a space program and we successfully launch rockets and satellites into space, which many people don't know about us. We're also third in the world for patents held by residents, so quite an innovative, ingenious country. But it's not enough to really just state that to people, because fundamentally, most citizens aren't that interested in what's going on in other countries. They're simply interested in, what does it mean to me? How does it impact me? So we realised we had to take a more complete view and approach to this. So very similar to Costa Rica, we established a common narrative that sits across all of the elements of our outward communication, whether it be our tourism promotion board, through our student attraction, through migrant attraction, or through the role that we play in improving and increasing trade offshore or attracting investors and foreign direct investment. So we created a group that has representatives from each of those areas. So everybody has a voice around that table, and collectively we infuse each of those units and those organisations and agencies with the same sets of values, so that when we do speak globally, we're speaking from the same place. We have a sense of a DNA that runs through us, threads of commonality in terms of all that we do. We took this one step further and worked very closely with the private sector as well in New Zealand, because we are a small country and we don't have unlimited resources, and we need to share and gather all the voices that we do have and point them in the same direction. Now, the trick with that is that New Zealand is a very egalitarian society, and most Kiwis don't like to be told what to do. They like to do it themselves. And we are a sort of a nation of independent people. So that's quite challenging to get everyone on the same page. So it's it's a long-term strategy. And the way that we do that is by ensuring that the brand of the organisation is at the front, and that the New Zealand values are infused inside the work that those private sector brands do. So we don't want them to change what they're doing fundamentally. We want them to infuse our values and our New Zealandness into all the work that they do. And the flip side of that is that they'll benefit because of New Zealand's positive reputation. Now, again, that takes time to do. Those values that I talked to are these three, and we developed these both by interviewing our people at home to understand what we felt comfortable with, but also by doing perception research, as Costa Rica have done across the world, and testing these to understand, what do other people see? How are we perceived by others? What are the values that are recognised by our consumers and our buyers and our influencers offshore? And these three came through. Now, one word in there is a Māori word, and obviously that's not what our consumers and buyers said internationally. They use words like care, guardianship, protectors, you look after others. So in New Zealand, we have a term for this, which is kaitiakitanga, and it means guardianship, intergenerational guardianship. And as Vanita said in her introduction, that's because fundamentally we believe that, Mother Earth and Father Sky are all our ancestors, that the living Earth is in fact at one with humanity. And so we believe that it's important for us to guard that and protect that. Integrity is not a value that one talks to, it's a behaviour, it's an action that you take. And ingenuity is what I described earlier. It's the areas that we do well in, that we need to share more with the world. And those values are not just things that we portray out to the world, but things that we represent domestically and inside our organisation and inside government to ensure that the behaviours and the actions and the decisions that we make are in line with those values. And that's a really important, I think, lesson and opportunity for others to consider, is the role that values play in driving regulation, policy, actions and behaviours, and then of course those things reinforce your values, so it's a fortuitous circle, ideally. And when things don't make sense, when they don't line up with those values, that's when we question them and we get a little bit restless about what we're doing, whether it's good enough or not. Now, underneath all this sits a program of social sharing, and we share many, many stories across our social networks and our social channels, and also through the voices of our diplomats. And there are 5 key areas that we talk to. One is around people and society. So, for example, our diversity, women's suffrage, the fact that New Zealand was was the first country in the world to give women the vote. And also our approach to LGBTQI. Our finance minister is openly gay. We have one of the most diverse cabinets in the world now. Sustainability and environment, this is an area that we are perceived well in, but there is always more to say on that, and areas to share and opportunities to share with others. Culture and heritage, as I said earlier, people aren't quite sure who we are and what we stand for and how our culture is portrayed. And so we do a lot of work to explain our culture and our heritage. Science and technology is an obvious one. We always talk to that, and creativity and art. And sharing cultural diplomacy. Sharing through cultural diplomacy is a very important aspect of our whole approach here. So those 5 areas or 5 theme areas is what drives all of our activity and our content and our program. Now, we've been really fortunate over the last couple of years to have some pretty momentous occasions, both positive and negative, and we've received a great deal of media coverage for that. And for a small nation, familiarity is one of the biggest issues that we face. What do people know about us? And you know, simply telling stories is often not enough. It's not necessarily newsworthy enough. So we've had some pretty impressive moments, not least of which is our Prime Minister attending the UN with her newborn baby and her partner in tow as well. And that created quite a stir, but it's not the only it's not the only time we've had a female Prime Minister. We've actually had 3 female Prime Ministers. So we haven't had one with a baby in the UN before, but for Kiwis, it's just the way you operate. That's what we expect of people. But we've also had some pretty dramatic crises over the last couple of years. We had a series of devastating earthquakes. We have had the attack on a mosque, killing over 51 people here. That is very unusual for us. We've never had anything like that before. It was shocking. It shocked us to our absolute core that we could so visibly see such an action in the heart of our community. Last year, unfortunately, we also we're actually an island full of volcanoes. We tend to forget that. In Auckland, where I live, we have over 200 volcanoes. I'm proud to say they're all dormant, not active, but we do have a very active volcano, Whakaari Island, and unfortunately that erupted last year and killed many visiting tourists, which again was a huge shock to us. And then last but not least, we've also been suffering, as the rest of the world has, through COVID. But interestingly, our approach to this has really put us in the spotlight in terms of how we address issues. All of these factors, throughout all of these crises, we have really held firm on our values and addressed these issues based on our sense of what is right and what is good for people. And it's that consistency in the way that we approach things that has really changed people's perceptions of New Zealand through this media coverage in quite interesting ways. We've also made, and as I said, you know, these values, they drive our actions and our behaviours. So what do we get as a result of this? How does New Zealand turn up? Well, as I said, New Zealand gave women the vote first. We continue to be leaders in terms of women's rights, and gender equality is a core principle of ours. We still have work to do there, of course. Protest is a big part of our society, peaceful protest, to make change and to continue to strive for better. We've had many of these over the years. You can see here on the top right, one of the sort of refreshing things that came through after the mosque attack was that actually all of the gangs, and we do have them, just as every country does, stood up and protected our mosques and looked after our Muslim community. And that, I think, speaks volumes to how accepting we are of others. And then we banned assault rifles immediately. There was no question about that in New Zealanders' minds. We just did that. That was the right thing to do. There's no reason why anyone should ever have access to a semi-automatic weapon. We're a nation of hunters and farmers, so we're very familiar with guns, but we believe that they should be used for those purposes and nothing else. And then through, as I said, we have a very, very diverse cabinet, and our foreign minister, Nana Mahuta, she is Māori and she has a moko on her face. And again, we're very proud of what that means. We realise too that that's probably quite shocking for many people. But again, it represents to us, or Minister Mahuta, is a core representation of our belief in diversity and diverse voices, and valuing the indigenous nature of our country. So all of that has really shifted people's perceptions. So for us, in terms of, there are a set of new world rules really. Influence and soft power is no longer about banks and tanks. Values are what I call the new black in society. Freedom is everybody's dream. That is the thing that drives all people fundamentally. So that is more important than many other aspects. And quite frankly, as we've seen over the last couple of years, being good is actually in quite short supply. So we need to lead as Costa Rica do, and do the things that are right and good for others as well as for ourselves. And very importantly, citizens, of course, are crafting the news today more than ever. So country reputation is a very interesting and unusual expertise, if you will. I don't think any of us are experts in it yet. I think we're all still learning because the world keeps changing and we have to keep adapting with that. So what we've seen certainly is an uptick in terms of some of the results that we've seen, if you want to measure, country score drivers. Most interestingly for us, whilst appealing environment has always been a high score for us, as you can see here, effective government and advanced economy have also increased quite significantly over the last couple of years. And that's a result of this concerted effort to communicate what we do and how we do that and who we are as a people. So that's it from me, and I'm going to leave it to Simon to lead on questions. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed, and thank you again, Daniel. Both fascinating stories. And I've got a number of questions, of course. I'm going to start though by saying it seems, you've both created and sustained authentic and successful nation brands, which start with the core idea of environmental sustainability, but obviously go beyond that. And clearly good governance, the participation of business and the inclusion of your citizens have been key to creating and sustaining both brands. And I think, Rebecca, as you just said, you're measured now on being effective government and an advanced economy. That's impressive. How much do you think the success of both of brands can be attributed to New Zealand and Costa Rica being countries with relatively small populations that are, as you say, quite egalitarian, that trust their institutions and are socially cohesive? Either of you, I think.
I'll kick off with that. So even through this COVID pandemic, a lot of people have said, well, of course you've handled it well because there's hardly any people there. Right? It's 5 million people across the country, so God dealt you a good hand. I actually think it's less about population size. It's more about power distance ratio for us and the egalitarian nature of our society. So in New Zealand, it's relatively easy to find the right people, to access the right people, and to influence the right people. Bureaucracy and undue process doesn't get in the way for us. But that didn't come about by accident. We undertook a massive reform program a little later than Costa Rica, actually. Our massive reform program came through in the 80s, where we stripped away a lot of unnecessary regulation and unnecessary bureaucracy in order to streamline government and give citizens, New Zealand society, a greater voice in determining the future of the country. And look, we're fundamentally quite a sort of a centrist country. You know, we don't have massive differences between the left and right. Probably about 85% of our population are what we'd call swing voters. They're kind of central. And so we don't have those issues and extremes to deal with as much, but our society does judge our government on how it deals with problems, and that's how governments are elected in, effectively in New Zealand, is how are you going to deal with some of the issues that we feel are really important to deal with. So you will find a family that has traditionally voted for one party, but the youth will be voting for another party. We're not as divided as that. We go for the policies in terms of what's right for the country.
Great. Interesting. Daniel, your thoughts?
I think there's a lot, as Reka has been saying, in how we approach this. As there's a lot of similarities as we approach this as countries. I don't think it is the size of the population. I thought we both are, well, about 5 million people in each of the countries. I think that the most important thing is that we do have a vision that whatever our resources may be, I mean, whatever the wealth the country produces, we have to distribute it, make good efforts to distribute it within the population in the best possible even pattern for the welfare of the majority of the people within the country. So I think that just that decision in our governments marks quite a difference from many other places around the world, which will hopefully follow that same lead. But that happened for us not in the 80s, but in the 1950s, around our last big reform. It was the result of our last civil war. Thank God that was the last one, at least that's what we have known. And a new constitution was written from that very beginning, creating a lot of institutions that were in charge of producing precisely that, social progress for the majority of the population. So things came along the way, like an improvement in education. Just that fact, having a whole generation of people that were concerned about not only, well, better educated, very greater understanding of how things could be done, rather than just by, I don't know, creating a big turmoil or wars. So instead of that, going the other way around through dialogue. Also, the health system was dramatically improved thanks to those decisions, early decisions. And later, about the 70s, as I told you before, we start passing law in terms of protecting the environment. We were rapidly, we find out that at the time when, I don't know, many people that were talking in the 70s about the importance of protecting the environment. I'm sure there was around the world, but that was not a topic that was in a government's agenda, or usually in a government's agenda. For us, the worries was that we were going under a big deforestation rate. And soon we realized that we were about to end up our resources. We keep going the same path. Our surface is very, very small. And so those decisions started right there and they're being taken nowadays still. And as Rebecca has said, it's like a live discussion. I think it's something that goes back and forth. I mean, there's no one single country that's not going under some challenges to become a better country, or to be a better version of it. And I think that can only be achieved if the population is mature enough to have those discussions in a clear and orderly fashion.
That sounds like that's a very good comment, a mature population to be able to have these kinds of discussions. Because I was going to say, what are the biggest challenges that you both have in sustaining good governance and people and businesses participation, even from a practical level, as in your particular roles? I think it'd be interesting to know what are the most important qualities to have as in your role as heads of national brands. I think bringing it down to that level would be interesting, because it's how you sustain this in an active way.
Okay, from a place branding perspective, I think we can talk about three things. Okay, first, the governance. I told you about this steering committee that we have over there, and we have the hierarchies. But since Costa Rica is a democracy, every time we go through election period, 60% of our committee changes.
Okay.
And it's likely that the new hierarchies their background won't be from branding or marketing, or maybe the place branding concept itself. It will be just a blurry thing in their minds. And then it's very important for them to understand the whole concept behind it. And to explain very, very fast that it's not just a marketing thing. It's greater, and it runs in the long term, so that they cannot leverage upon that for their political careers. That's quite a challenge over there. In terms of the private sector, which I think is also a very important stakeholder for us, the thing is that they have to feel, and I think that's something that both New Zealand and Costa Rica have done. Although we don't have movie stars yet in Hollywood. You have plenty. Love the movies, by the way. The thing is that the private sector has a very important role in terms of place branding, because it's their products, their services and goods that transcend our borders and start telling that story. So the way they produce those products is very important, because they have to be very well aligned, compelling along with our narrative. They have to have that commitment. It would be just a pity to have companies within Costa Rica that will be embracing, I don't know, stuff like greenwashing or stuff like that. I don't know, going against the current, polluting the environment and stuff like that, or not being conscious about it. They have to embrace policies in terms to improve that. To assure that they are respecting the environment as we are intent, as our population is concerned already about. And the third one is the population. In fact, the thing is that, the people is what brings the identity, is what completes the circle. When you have the territory, for starters, we have beautiful sceneries in the majority of the countries around the world, different, but they're beautiful. And but that's just that is the territory. But the people is what gives the flavor, is the culture, is what people do with the place that they have been given to live. And the fact that they have to understand what the country, what the identity, where they come from, rather than if it's from the indigenous people, which is a very impressive thing that what New Zealand has done with that. Or from migrants, which other countries may say it's a very important quota of their population and their identity. The thing is that thing, the identity, and knowing what you are, how the rest of the global community knows about your place, and what you should be feeling really proud about who you are, and trying to close that gap between what people know and what you really are all about, is quite a challenge as well. Mm-hmm. And that you cannot do that just like deploying one ad campaign after the other and the other. It goes beyond that. And it cannot be something that it's managed like a very imposed thing. It has to be very organic. So that's quite a challenge for place branding teams around the world. And I think those are my three.
Do you have practical issues when it comes to monitoring the use of the Essential brand? I mean, you mentioned greenwashing. I mean, do you have mechanisms for making sure that it's not abused? Or is it the case that because people share the values and realize that, you know, their products represent the country, you don't really have many cases of you know, greenwashing, let's say?
The licensing protocol is something that both New Zealand, as Rebecca I'm sure will tell because I'm speaking a lot, I'm sorry, Rebecca. The thing is that both New Zealand and Costa Rica, the licensing protocols may be quite different, but they are both built upon very solid foundations and also protected in terms of by law. So and they're structured under careful reviews. And so we go to the companies and we review their more than the product itself to carry that brand and say that you are Essential Costa Rica licensee. You have to give proof and supply proof of that, and every now and then you have to sustain that proof that you're saying, because the reviews are going to come. You're going to be audited from time to time regarding that specifically. Of course, there will always be risks, right? But the thing is that since it is protected by law and is not granted as a free thing for anyone to use it, that reduces the risk of having licensees that may be going on to, well, under not such good practices, just to say that, in an illegality pattern.
That's quite powerful, protected by law and reviewed. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on the challenges and also this specific issue of managing the New Zealand brand? You say that you infuse values into the private sector, and that seems to work very well with a cohesive society, I would think.
It does, and similarly, as Daniel said, we also have the Fernmark program, which is our licensing program, and we're also particularly careful and mindful about who is able to access that, and it is a paid program. So we look very carefully at the integrity of the company involved, the integrity of the people, and we particularly make sure, and this sounds a little harsh, that if anything were to go askew with that organisation or its products, that we have the ability within our New Zealand legal system to manage that. Mm-hmm. And so that is driven many of the decisions around how we do this. We don't allow it to be owned or used by anyone from an overseas perspective, even if they're selling New Zealand products. So we keep it very grounded in our own systems, and that allows us to audit, etc. Within that, though, there is, you know, freedom to operate and encouragement for those organisations to really tell our story, tell our New Zealand story, and in a competitive environment, they see the value in that. So we also run an international IP protection program. We run monitoring. We have legal advice underneath it. It's nowhere near as expensive or as difficult as one might think. It's actually quite straightforward. You just have to have good processes around it. And coming back to the question of governance, I think governance is probably one of the topics that we all talk about when we get together as nation brand people, because we share some similar challenges in it. Ours is less. The membership of our governance group fluctuates less than it does for other countries, particularly South American countries, Latin American countries. But what we do get potentially every 4 years is a new minister. In fact, sometimes we get them more regularly than that because they get moved around in their portfolios. And the biggest challenge I find is re-education of that minister. As Daniel says, you know, they're not marketers, but boy, they really do believe they are. And and so you have to really work with the personality that you've got and find their trigger points and really work with them on understanding in a way that makes sense for them and in a way that helps them achieve their goals. So it's very different depending on the minister. It's a very stakeholder management is is complex and challenging and very exciting all at the same time, because when you win them over and you get them to the right place, it's really satisfying and it releases a lot of capability for you. I think the other challenge for governance is that each agency that sits around the table, whether it be tourism or education or trade, fundamentally has a degree of self-interest at that table that can't be helped. You can't avoid that. And so, you know, keeping everyone focused on the bigger opportunity is a big part of the role that I play, and working with each of their teams to pull them out of their own creative world and get them to think about what would benefit the country is an ongoing challenge.
Sounds like empathy is a really important quality here, and to see themselves as enablers and facilitators as well as influencers.
I think there are three qualities that you have to have, maybe more, but the three that strike me as the most important in leading a program like this is resilience.
Yep.
You have to be very, very resilient. I think you need to be extremely optimistic. Mm-hmm. And those two things go together. And I think you also have to have a great deal of charisma and charm. Mm-hmm. To win people over. You cannot be a quiet introvert doing this job. You really have to be out there selling it, working it, developing your stakeholder relationships, and convincing and cajoling and motivating people to get in the right direction. Yeah.
That charm thing you mentioned, I completely agree. It's quite a task. And
an idea of mistakes you've made and what the learnings have been from them. Obviously, we all make mistakes, and the key idea today is that we fail fast and we learn from them. It'd be very interesting to know what you both think are the mistakes that you've learned most from and would like to share.
Mistakes we've made. I will start with that one. I think the mistake that we would have made is, I'm not quite sure how we might have done this differently, but being a very small organisation, it's very hard to cover all bases. And so you sometimes take your eye off the ball on one particular group, and then you lose that connection point and you've got to go back and rebuild it. And the business community is the hardest, I find, to do that with, because they're, you know, it's a big machine. They've all got their own objectives. And so the mistake we make is in sometimes taking our eye off that ball and focusing on, say, the diplomatic corps or the stakeholders in the minister's area. And if we lose that connection, you just need one or two very loud voices to make things a little difficult. And you go, right, I need to go and spend some time with these 3 people or these 4 people and help them and get on the same page. Probably the other, there are many mistakes, but the other mistake, and this may sound a little counterintuitive, is is a lack of diversity in the governance area. And this is a challenging one, as Daniel said, because the people who sit around our table are determined by cabinet paper. It's predetermined which CEOs sit around that table and who's there. And we have a couple of private sector spots. But the conversation we're having at the board table at the moment is, how do we balance it more toward private sector and less toward government? Because we need more diverse voices, we need more Indigenous voices there, and you don't necessarily get those in the middle to upper echelons of government. So how do we get those more diverse voices around the table?
Fascinating.
But still, you have a very strong and beautiful brand.
Yes. Yeah.
Daniel, what would you offer?
In our case, I think through this first 7 years after we started this version of the whole project, the mistakes were created as a bias from the very beginning. The first one is that we thought, when we were pulling all this together, that it was going to be a international focus thing. I mean, like, okay, it's just getting your story out there. And the big challenge was only that. And as Rebecca was explaining, talked about two things. The first one is the international, well, the government, the officials, and their knowledge about what place branding is all about, and keep that steady. And also the private sector engagement, and explain that to the population. So we committed all three of those mistakes from the very beginning, and we suffered from those naive beliefs, early beliefs, I think. So that was one of it. So if you want to avoid that mistake, you need to have in your team people that are very well. You have to read. You have to go through the books. You have to call Rebecca. You have to call everyone, all your peers around the world, and in a very short span of time, and to understand what place branding is all about, and learn from other countries and other experiences as well, just to avoid committing those mistakes of thinking that it's only an international image thing. Is rather than that is a local stakeholder management thing, to keep all them tied together under a consent narrative. And the other thing might be is that in terms of measurements, I think, because it's something that you always are asked about, because, well, since most of place brand initiatives are funded through public funds, the press and the people want to know what you're doing with that money. And how's the impact of that. So when you start talking about the long term, they try to bring short-term metrics into the conversation. And the most sexy things that they find out there are indexes, rankings, and stuff like that. So they think, oh, you see, because of your work, we fell like 3 positions in our, I don't know which X ranking that's measuring place branding or brands around the world. And the thing is that you cannot rely on one single metric in terms to measure your performance. Both New Zealand and Costa Rica use a lot of tools regarding that. As Rebecca showed, this is a multi-dimensional thing. And rankings of thought are a multi-dimensional tool. They are based on other rankings as well, in some cases, and others on surveys. They happen, you cannot interview the whole wide world and ask about what New Zealand is all about. It will be nonsense. You ask, you have to deploy surveys or research in, I don't know, populations that have been engaged or related to New Zealand. It will be pointless to ask, for instance, Panama, what they know about New Zealand wine. Maybe they know a little bit, but it will be as famous as probably Argentinian or Chilean wine, which is just around the corner. So it's something like that. I think it's also, you have to be very cautious about how you explain, how you measure your work. And we took that for granted in the very beginning. And we thought it was just about rankings. And we very fast, the press made this point that it was not about that. So that was quite the thing.
Okay. Thank you. That's great. Before we end, I'd like to ask you, bring it back to where we are today in COVID. Rebecca, you mentioned clearly that that's had an impact on the nation brand, and I think probably it's had an impact on both brands. How has it affected New Zealand's brand? I think the country was perceived as demonstrating moral leadership and integrity during COVID. In a way, that must be a positive, but have there been negatives? Perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about that, and maybe then Daniel too.
Look, notwithstanding the terrible tragedies and the deaths that occur through COVID, the very strange effect for us has been it's had an incredibly positive outcome on perceptions of New Zealand because of the way that we've dealt with it and because of that moral leadership. The shadow effect of that is that we're seen as more contemporary than one might have assumed before. We're seen as more educated than someone might have assumed before, and we're seen as quite independent, and that's good for us. So there have been a lot of positives in terms of shifting brand perception for New Zealand around it. If there were any negatives, as I said earlier, it would be that for some populations, their view of our success is related to the fact that we're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean surrounded by fish and we're very small and we've got not many people. So, potentially perceptions of sort of distance and size are more negative than they were before, and that's challenging for us. But the positives certainly do outweigh that. And it's given... to Daniel's point, what's been the interesting side effect of that is it's given our society and our population a boost in terms of self-confidence and a sense of, and pride's not the right word, but confidence that we're on the right track, that the way that we do things is good for New Zealand and good for others, and that we need to stay the course and play to that strength of ours and not look to others for leadership on this, because actually you have to do what's right for your own your own country and your neighbours as well. So it's given us, I think, as a society, more self-confidence to continue down this path of putting values first and people first.
Great. Daniel, what would you say?
I completely agree. I mean, the thing is that, but I like to address it in a different way. I mean, let's talk about COVID not as a health crisis is because if we go in that path, we will be talking about the deaths and stuff like that. Well, it's very sensitive stuff. But let's talk about crisis. I mean, New Zealand has gone under several crises. This is not the first that they face, in Costa Rica for sure, through several as well. But the thing is that when you're going through a crisis, this one obviously is a very dramatic one, because in our lifetime, we have never seen something that affects the whole wide world at the same time in such a way, uncontrollable way, by the way. It depends on the countries and how they manage each situation, the crisis, and their structure, how the outcome is going to be. And depending, if you already have that, if you already have this society that is concerned about their citizens, genuinely concerned about the citizens, their well-being, they're going okay, and they already created institutions and organizations and a structure for this and prepare ahead for that. So it's likely that you not only will perform under such a crisis, but also the outcome of that will be believable. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. I mean, you cannot, in terms of place branding, I'm just talking about place branding since I'm not a politician or doctor or, I don't know, the tourism minister. But in terms of place branding, you can only talk about things that you already are. You cannot say that you are performing magnificent through this COVID-19 crisis if you're not. Even if the numbers favor you for any particular condition, it won't be believable if the country hasn't proven themselves before as in those particular grounds. That being caring about your people, that being either health, either economic development, or well, at least going through different initiatives to preserve the economy, because you care about the people, not about the numbers. That's something very, very important. So in our case, we haven't performed as beautiful as New Zealand has. We haven't had that luck. But I have to say that our authorities in health and the authorities that are in charge of the economic situation of the country has done their best, and is visible and is believable as well. We're not an island. We're connected with Panama in the south and Nicaragua in the north, and Central America is a path, it's a trade path. So we, at no point, it was not a possibility for us to close the borders for all this time. We had to let the flow go back and forth. We tried to regulate it a little bit, and it was not a possibility. We had to open it right away. And so the virus came into the country, and the first part of this situation was pretty much controlled, but then it spread. And so we moved into community, I don't know the name in Spanish, is contagio comunitario, is community spread. I don't know,
Yes.
and really fast. But all thought there has been very unfortunate deaths, and a lot of them. The mortality rate is a reflection of a health system that has done everything in their power just not to saturate the system and be able to attend the majority of the people and save lives, going against all financial decisions, lives first. So, but that's not something that comes from the place branding perspective. That's something just what the country is all about. And we, of course, in the media, what is being covered is just that. I mean, it's like, well, Costa Rica is still faithful for what they are. Well, it's expected that they will be performing okay in terms of COVID-19. But it's not as something that we have been like promoting or something like that. The other thing that I'm concerned about COVID-19 is that it will switch the way people do things around the world in terms of trade and tourism. We all know that. And that for sure will be telling a different story about our countries, not only New Zealand and Costa Rica, but all the countries, all the cities, all the places around the world. If you recall, like a couple of years ago, your main concern was, in health issues was, oh, are there pharmacies around and is water safe to drink? And those may be just the two questions you may ask in terms of health before you're going into the holidays to a particular destination. Nowadays, it's going to be quite different thing. And that will stick, I believe, for quite a while. So in terms of public policies, which in the end and in the long run will impact the perceptions of a country, decisions have to be taken. And I think only the countries that have already a structure regarding that and a specific vision of health safety will be able to react and create this good position in terms of trust in health issues. Some will come faster than others, of course. It will be an international, worldwide issue for sure. And that goes the same for products. I mean, the practices of how products are produced, of either goods or services, how the companies care about their people, how if they have all the health conditions in order to give safety to the workers. I don't know. Many things were already out there, but will be more important, more visible, and more talked about in different scenarios.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rebecca, too. I think we're probably drawing to a close. We really appreciate your time. Benita, would you like to say a few concluding remarks at this stage?
Sure. I think I really enjoyed the the parallels and the differences, and one of the things that's really emerged for me was the similarity in the message that you reinforced, which is so heartening, that sustainability pays back, Daniel, and that was echoed in what Rebecca said about being a good country counts. And the fact that you've migrated from a GDP-based economy to a well-being economy, I mean, this is so exemplary for countries all around the world. In fact, there's so many countries seeking to compete in this domain of the happiness index, and it's something you've already achieved. And Rebecca, you brought home, you were so candid in talking about the unintended consequences of portraying yourself as a pure country, a beautiful country, and you've really appreciate your candid approach to the need to take people on a gentle journey across through the New Zealand story, and talk about other aspects of progress you've made. So far as there's a very strong, I think, exemplary message that you both have for other countries. So I'm really delighted that this is a concluding series or maybe we'll continue if there's demand for it. It was just very fitting to have you both on this, and you emerge both as individuals with a conscience, while you're guarding brands with a conscience, and I really appreciate that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also just like to conclude. I think really both of you it's been wonderful listening to you both, and I was really struck, I think, by Rebecca saying that what you need as individuals is resilience, optimism, and charm, which I think, and implicit in that, I think, is the ability to have real empathy for people. And I think the idea of being a good country really is an important quality today. And we're having this conversation at the time of the inauguration of Biden in the US, and this is an opportunity, I think, to be more optimistic that actually, being kind and being good are important qualities that we shouldn't underestimate. So thank you both very much for your time. I know we've gone on quite a long time, and Rebecca, I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you. Vanita probably needs to go to bed. Daniel, you're halfway through the day. But thanks so much. Really.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Benita, for the opportunity, and thank you, Rebecca. It's always
any final comments from either of you?
Final comments. When we're open, come visit. We'd love to see you. I think just as Daniel said, for anyone watching this, if you're not sure where to go or how to get started, or if you're finding it challenging, reach out. Just reach out to other people. We're a unique group across the world, but everyone's always happy to share what we've learned, what's worked, what hasn't worked. So don't feel that you're on your own.
That's brilliant. I think that's a really good ending point. We are living in a world where we actually need to do things together.
The place branding concept itself actually brings people together. I mean, as I was saying, rather than seeing ourselves as competitors, I don't know, Rebecca is a very good example of that, but we have talked to people from many places, and what we have found out is that there's a really unselfish approach to sharing all the good things that we have done, all the pains that we have had, and all the learnings that we have acquired through the time. So because, well, it is small world after all, right?
Yep. Great. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
And we'll stay in touch.
For sure. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks again.